We talked a little bit about the shifting coasts, I guess, and the relocating to Los Angeles, first meeting the Byrds folks. Can you kind of shape how this comes together, kind of paint a picture a little bit, maybe borrow some of the storytelling that you use for your show?
Yeah, I'll give you a sample of it. I don't want to give it away because I do this in my show.
Sure, no,
So,
understood.
Basically, I went out to L.A. as a solo artist, and I had just left the Brill Building where I'd learned about the Beatles. And my job in the Brill Building was to listen to the radio and write songs like the ones out there. So I really got impressed by the Beatles and wanted to do things like... Oh yeah, tell you something, I think you'll understand. I heard these folk music chord changes, and it made me want to combine folk music and rock and roll. And Bobby Darin, I've been working for Bobby Darin, he told me rock and roll, that's the way to go. So I had that influence too. So I went out to LA and got a job at the Troubadour, opening up for Hoyt Axton. And I was doing folk songs with a rock and roll beat, and the people in the Troubadour didn't like it. But Gene Clark was in the audience, and he came backstage and said, I like the Beatles, and I like folk songs, and I see what you're doing. Let's write some songs and see what happens. So Gene and I started writing songs, and then David Crosby came along and put in a harmony part, and we all became a trio. Jim Dixon was a friend of David's and let us record at the World Pacific Studio for free, just to see how we sounded. And we realized we needed a bass player and a drummer, so we got Michael Clark and Chris Hillman, and we had a 5-piece band, and then we searched for a name and came up with the Byrds with a Y, because the Beatles had changed their spelling, and we thought that was cool. And then we got a record deal. We went over to an agent's house in Hollywood and auditioned for him, and his daughter loved it. And he told Miles Davis about it, and Miles got us a deal on Columbia Records.
What a huge thing to have as like the go-between, the middleman.
Yeah.
To have Miles.
Miles, yeah. I know. Miles.
Right. And it's such a merging of, because here you're doing the folk and he's coming from the jazz. And does a connection that continued at all, or was it literally just that one thing?
We did Monterey together. He played on Rock and Roll Star when we wrote that song and recorded it. And he came up to Monterey and played with us for that gig. And somebody just tweeted a picture of that. Oh, it was, let's see. I don't know. It was one of the rappers, like a rapper, put up that picture
of Miles jamming with you guys at Monterey Pop.
Chuck D.
Okay, wow.
Put
From
that
Public
picture
Enemy.
up, yeah, today.
Tweeting Roger McGuinn. It's a very small world.
It is a small world. Well, I appeared with Chuck D at a conference. I think it was in Colorado or some. I don't know. It was back about 15 years ago when Napster was going on, and there was this whole controversy about whether downloading was cool or not. And we said, hey, it's the new radio. It's great. It's publicity.
That was an interesting segment in our conversation the other day. It actually lent itself to a whole different, because you were talking about your Senate hearing that you did, and you had Lars Ulrich from Metallica sitting next to you.
And he was irate about the whole thing. Well, I could see his point. He had just had his album stolen and put out for free, and they wanted to sell them. So I saw his point. But on the other hand, it's publicity. It's people are going to buy the real thing.
Oh, absolutely.
MP3s don't sound as good as CDs.
And it was right at that moment I could see how you would I could see both points of view, how he would be disturbed to have just lost a record he put his heart and soul in, and how you would see it as what it sort of was, as this new device that you can listen to the radio. You make your own radio, essentially, just by picking out what you want to play.
Yeah.
But the part of it that I thought was interesting beyond that was more who you were sitting next to. You're sitting there and you're next to Lars, and downloading aside, just on a musical note, you have a connection to him on a whole nother level, which would be a musical note, 8 Miles High. When you are maybe from a hard rock, heavy metal school or younger, and you study the origins of that kind of music, we're very fortunate. We have Kirk Hammett from Metallica. He lives right down the street here in Honolulu.
Cool.
And whether it's the minor keys, whether it's the chord progression, other aesthetics, 8 Miles High.
Yeah.
When you think about that song and you're sitting there next to Lars, it occurred to me when I was thinking about our conversation afterward, just that I imagine I guess he never turned. And did he have any musical conversation about?
No, it was all about
So he
the
missed his-
downloading. It was a pretty tense environment at the Senate.
Right.
I mean, you can go to prison for saying the wrong thing in front of these guys, so you have to be really careful.
Yeah.
And it was pretty tense, and there was a lot of anger. Lars was angry about the downloading thing,
Sure.
and Sean from Napster was there sitting next to his attorney, and I was with Michael Robertson from MP3.com. I just really went there to help Michael Robertson out because I thought MP3.com was a good thing. It was good for artists. They gave artists 50% of the recordings if they put a record out, a CD out.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand where the difference of opinions would come. But musically, when I think about the lineage of hard rock and heavy metal and the connection that there's no question when you stop and think of the key that song is in, 8 Miles High, when you think of the chord changes in that song, the structure of it really lends itself to what it's proto hard rock. I don't know. Have you ever looked back and realized, the connection? Because it's not very many clicks back from Sabbath.
No, it really never occurred to me. Now, did Metallica do 8 Miles High per
No.
se? No, but their style is
They are
like
one of
that.
them. Yeah, and they're
Yeah,
a
it's got
really
that-
important
like a-
band.
And then, of course, I did that. But these days, I do it more like.
It's nice to hear. You sing that one too in your concerts?
Yeah.
That is a tasty one. That is a very, very tasty tune. I just wanted to, I look forward to having Kirk in here one day and just discussing the connection, the lineage of heavy metal and some of the things that inspired them. And when I was riffing, I listened to that. I remember we were talking about YouTube and using it as our choice of music service. I must have listened to that like 20 times in a row the other night, just like grooving on the changes in it, the arrangement of the song. And I just realized how much. I was like, wow, I wonder if Lars really missed his opportunity. He was so hopped up about his record. He could.
Somebody told me artificial energy was like a seed of heavy metal rock. The Byrds artificial.
And
I
there's
can
a
hear
lot
that.
of different, from different people, different angles to come at it. Also, there's instrumentation that has provided a lot of who you are. The connection to the Rickenbacker, was it doing Mr. Tambourine Man? That really arrived in the in your life. That was when you first started playing the Rick.
Yeah, I went to see the movie A Hard Day's Night with the rest of the Byrds and saw George Harrison had a Rickenbacker 12. And being a 12-string player already, I got to get that. So I did. I traded in my acoustic 12-string and my 5-string banjo and got the Rickenbacker.
Another Beatle influence.
A lot of Beatle influences in the Byrds, the harmonies and the hair, of course. And we even had black suits with velvet collars for a while until they got stolen. I told this to John Lennon. He said, I wish they'd stolen our suits.
When that period of when Easy Rider came out, the solo kinds of cuts. One of my favorites, the "It's All Right, Ma," that you had done. That was prior to you getting connection with Bob. You hadn't even really, you were covering his stuff, and he would not arrived as
No, we met him back.
You had already met
before the Byrds. He came to our rehearsal studio before we recorded Mr. Tambourine Man. He and Bobby Newirth, and they both gave us the thumbs up. They said, "This is cool, what you're doing." They liked it.
But it was, you hadn't come close even to, you didn't know that you were going to get a job working with him at any point until, was it 72, 73?
It was, the first time I worked with Bob was, I believe, 75.
And
the Rolling Thunder Review.
Right, and you hadn't gone into the studio and done something. I thought you had done something.
Oh yeah. Well, I knew him, and we both lived in Malibu.
Right.
And he used to come over to the house, and we'd hang out. And yeah, so I did record with him on the film soundtrack of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. He invited me over to the studio to Knockin' on Heaven's Door and Turkey Rag with a 5-string banjo and a couple other things.
And so in those later years, did you flash back on like the It's All Right Ma from the Easy Rider? I mean, were there times when he gave you kind of like, where you were to, because I know you explored your folk music connections and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, no, Bob did It's All Right Ma with a whole different thing. He did like Darkness at the Break of Noon, Shadows Even the Silver Spoon, Man-Made Played the Shadow. It's in D minor position with a rundown to C in E minor, like at the break of noon, shadows even the silver spoon, the handmaid bleed, the child's balloon, eclipses both the sun and moon. To understand, you know too soon, there is no sense in trying. So I didn't do that. I did it more like, I brought it up a key. Darkness at the break of noon, shadows even the silver spoon, the handmaid blade, the child's balloon, eclipses both the sun and moon. To understand, you know too soon, there is no sense in trying. Pointed threats they bluff with scorn, suicide remarks are torn from the fool's gold mouthpiece, a hollow horn plays wasted words that prove to warn. He not busy being born is busy dying. So don't fear when you hear a falling sound to your ear. It's all right, Ma, I'm only trying. Like that.
That's a great jam. Roger McGuinn here, Atherton Performing Arts Studio, playing some of music's really important selections. I always, that was a record my parents had. I would always groove on that version of the tune. You talked about the Rolling Thunder Review Tour, and you said some of your best memories of your whole life come from being out on that.
Yeah, it was a great tour. Bob put us up in resorts every night, you know, and it was incredible. Everything was free, and we got paid too, but not a whole lot. It wasn't really about the money, but it was about the camaraderie of like 40 or 50 people on the road together and traveling up and down in these buses. Bob had got a bus from Frank Zappa that had all the seats taken out, and they put in a bedroom in the back and bunks in the middle and couches and TVs. And it was the first I'd seen of that kind of motorhome style touring bus, which everybody has now. It's a standard, but back then it was a new thing. It was motorhomes were even fairly new at that point. They didn't have motorhomes.
Tours were being done on regular buses.
Yeah, like the first Byrds tour was on a Continental Trailways bus with all the seats in it, and the driver had a cap like a policeman, and we hid in the back. We were scared of this guy, you know.
So, Rolling Thunder, not so much the money. Bob had a vision of the thing that he wanted to do, so that's why it was what it was.
Yeah, well, it was 1975. There's always a balance between commerce and art, and the commerce part was overweighing the art part in 1975. So Bob wanted to kind of put a little more, inject some art into the scene, and that was his thing. He never expressed that verbally, but I could see that's what he was doing. And because I remember he came over to my house in Malibu, and we were shooting baskets in the backyard, And he said, I want to do something different. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I want to do something like a circus. I said, okay. And that was it. And then I ran into him again, and he was putting together Rolling Thunder, just out of random people that he found in the village. And Scarlett Rivera was just walking down the street with a violin case, and he was driving. He had a Cadillac Eldorado convertible that he drove around town in, and he saw her, and he said, "Hey, you play that thing?" And she said, "Yeah." And he said, "Come over to the studio in SIR." And the same thing with a lot of the other musicians. Mick Ronson was just hanging around. Ronnie Blakely was around. I think she was doing a gig somewhere in the village, and it was great the way he put it all together. And of course, Joan Baez was a natural, and Joni Mitchell came out on it.
What a lineup of cats, huh?
It was fun.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
I
it was
can
way
see your
fun.
mind as you're going back
Oh,
through it.
it was heaven. It was great.
I love that. I love the look he gets on his face as he's going through the stuff. It's kind of cool.